Alex Kantrowitz, welcome to the Realignment.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about what I know are your two favorite subjects, third-party candidates and sports.
I'll be like, all right, dude, just get out of here.
But in all
Good
seriousness, it's great to be here. You guys have built an amazing show, and your listeners are loyal and they love it. And I just have to say I admire it. I was calling a friend to talk about, what I should talk about with you guys on the way over here, and he's like, I'm watching right now. He's watching your Hill Show saga.
Oh, really? That's funny.
So I admire it, and it's a real great opportunity to be here, and I want to say thank you for having me on.
Sweet, man. Absolutely. It's good to see you.
So speaking of poorly done segues, back in April, actually came across you way before you launched your Substack and your podcast because you released your book, Always Day One, How the Tech Titans Plan to Stay on Top Forever. Great book, however, horrific timing. You've talked about it in one of your podcasts and stuff too. You've released this book literally a month into the pandemic. So the first question is, what were you trying to say in the book, aside from the obviousness in the title? But also, it's been 6, 7, 8 months. What would you have added or changed based on all that?
Thanks. The book is Always Day One, and it looks at the work cultures and internal technology of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. And so what I was trying to say in the book is, I'm here in Silicon Valley as a reporter covering these companies, and they just do things differently. And I do think that their internal operations and their culture are the reason why they keep growing stronger. Usually when we have a big company, they just get clunky and bureaucratic and fall apart, but the opposite is happening with the tech giants. And so I think we have two options. One is we can sort of point fingers and yell about how they're bad, and I think there's certainly a place for that. But I thought there was a real opportunity to tell people what's going on inside so that they could co-opt these systems and put them into place in their own workplaces. And so then we don't have just 5 companies on one side and everybody else on the rest saying what happened to us. So the idea was really to just empower folks, to help them understand what's going on, what they're doing well. And so hopefully they'll be able to implement that and be more competitive. And, in terms of what I would change now that I know, what I know, I would say, very little, because I think that the world that I thought we were heading to, a world where technology plays a major role in the workplace, is one that we've accelerated to much faster than it was going to happen before the pandemic. And you sort of see that. I mean, look at the stock market. The stock market certainly thinks that, basically dumping all this value into these tech companies probably too much. But I think everybody in their own day-to-day has experienced some level of this. And I think it's only going to increase. So we have a decision now. It's do we ignore what's going on inside, or do we start to try to figure out? And I would definitely be in favor of the latter.
What's fascinating, Alex, is that you wrote it from a business perspective, but I'm not sure if you know, I'm sure you know this, but here in DC, there are people and activists and tastemakers and take havers like me who obsess over the internal culture of these companies because they have such a disproportionate and large impact on our lives. One of the ones that really kind of exploded into view was this whole thing around Coinbase, which is for the listeners who don't know, it's a cryptocurrency trading platform. It's where I've used it to buy Bitcoin. They do not pay me, just to be clear. And look, it's a great platform. You should sponsor the podcast. But
listeners,
for real though,
their first Bitcoin free.
There you go. Here's my discount code. I'll put it in the show notes. All that being said, Coinbase had this whole thing where they were like, look, Coinbase is a mission-focused company. We're not going to talk politics. And they even offered exit packages to some of their employees who didn't feel comfortable with that statement. All of that to be said, which is that part of that internal culture, at least from outside looking in, seems to be this rock bed of cultural liberalism, at least in the big 5 that you name there. But then there are alternative approaches. What do you think that we could learn kind of from the fights of those two things, and maybe incorporate to anybody who wants to run a successful company?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the fact that so I talk all in the book largely about invention and how these companies are inventive and how they reinvent. But of course, the tools that they've implemented inside their companies give people the opportunity to voice dissent as well. When you think about Google, their collaborative culture allows ideas to move across divisions at rapid speed, and that's why they've been able to build the Google Assistant, virtual assistant, and make it better than Siri, despite Apple having a 5-year head start. It's all due to that internal culture where Maps and Android and Search and YouTube and Calendar can all speak with each other and they're not siloed. And technology makes that happen. But it also connects employees. And employees, when they decided that something wasn't right inside Google, decided to band together and protest in a pretty loud way, a pretty unprecedented walkout where 20,000 people walked off of campuses worldwide inside Google to protest the way that they've handled accusations of sexual harassment. And I think there's something to be said there that we have companies where employee bases are interlinked with communication technology and they are becoming hive minds in the way they haven't before. But they also feel today that they want to take political stands inside their companies more than ever before. And that could be for a number of reasons. I mean, where people joke about the Mitt Romney, like companies are people too thing, but companies play a pretty big role in the political system. They can donate unlimited amount of money due to Citizens United, and I feel like people want their companies to take, political stands that sort of affirm their values. Then I think that a lot of liberal employees saw that the electoral system in 2016 didn't get the job done for them, and people sitting at companies like Google thought maybe they could enact some change that way. And then, leading up to what was going on with Coinbase, the Black Lives Matter protests put a lot of pressure on companies around the world to, stand up and say Black Lives Matter. And these political debates hashed out inside companies, not just inside tech companies all around the world. And so now management is starting to confront a new reality where they say we were initially building products and now we're being asked to be political actors. And how do we do that? And some will reflect their employees' viewpoints, and others, like Coinbase, will say this is holding us back too much. We don't want it here. And that's why they banned it. Of course, Coinbase had bigger problems underneath the surface, which sort of indicates why they made that move. But you could think, okay, maybe there's some logic to that, or if people actually put that energy into the actual the more mainstream political system, the electoral system versus corporations, are they going to get more done? I think there's a discussion to be had there. But right now it's something that, managers across probably every industry, and especially in Silicon Valley, are confronting and dealing with and trying to figure out how to make that work.
So before we get deeper into the themes of basically tech's 2016 to 2020 and going into 2021, let's talk about what a tech company actually is. We had Reese Wiedemann, who did the book on WeWork, on the show a month ago, and we're talking about WeWork, the real estate company. And part of what gets wrapped up into all of WeWork's problem is the idea is a real estate company, a tech company, is it worth $48 billion because it has the tech multiplier, all that sort of idea. So as you're writing about the tech industry, and as you have been writing about it for the past several years, how do you think of what a tech company is? How broadly does this sort of encompass everything?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marshall. I think that we need to redefine sort of the way that we think of what a tech company is and what's not. And the reason is because it's cliche to say, but every company is a tech company now. I mean, we all look at us right now. Like, is this a media company or is this a tech company? We're all, using Zoom. We're recording on QuickTime. Like, you guys will put it together in some editing software. You're not going to take this audio and then kind of cut the tape and put it together like you would in the radio. So there's a high dose of technology everywhere. Everything from what we're doing here to the auto industry and even real estate. The real estate industry, when they're building buildings now, they fly drones in some cases through the buildings with machine learning baked in, so they can see whether that building is starting to fit the blueprint that they put out. Because typically what happens in a building is they put a beam in the wrong place and they build up and they're like, oh shit, the beam is in the wrong place. They have to take the whole building down, build it back up, and it's terrible. So they have to become, quote unquote technology companies now. So here's what I'm going to suggest we do in terms of our redefinition of the way we think about these companies. You have two types of companies. You have companies that use technology, and you have platform companies. And platform companies are companies that people can build companies upon, right? So you sort of have like infinite scale that you can develop on top of those things. So something like AWS is a great example. AWS is a technology company. It provides the technology.
Explain AWS just for the people who are listening.
It's Amazon Web Services. It's essentially Amazon's back-end computing infrastructure that many companies across the web build their services upon. And so that's a platform company. You can sort of have infinite growth on top of that. Whereas something like a WeWork, understandably not really a tech company, it's a real estate company that uses technology, because WeWork doesn't just supply the platform where you can, no, it's physical buildings. And there's a natural limit to that. And that's why you see, just to not to get too market focused, but when the stock market thinks that you're a technology company, it will give you a multiple of like 30, which means that you're going to be valued like 30 times over your earnings, because 30 times your earnings, because they just see that you have certain revenue potential, but that can blow up in a minute, or a certain profit potential, but that could just increase exponentially. Whereas if you're not a tech company, you get a multiple 10 or under, because you can only grow so fast because you don't have this unlimited upside of a platform company. Sorry if that was too wonky. That's sort of the way I see it.
And to get into it a little deeper for a second, the perfect example of that tech multiplier theme is Tesla versus the established auto companies. So Tesla, everyone knows, if you're opening up your Robinhood app, man, we're just throwing out all the unpaid
Please sponsor
for
the podcast.
references
Every
here.
listener gets a Tesla.
Yeah, I know, right? And then be sure to slack it or something. But Tesla is an incredibly highly valued company on the stock market, because many people see it as a tech company, and you have companies such as GM, the legacy automakers, that aren't as preferenced in the stock market. And you also have companies like GE, they're trying to pivot themselves. So how do you think about those sort of, if you're a legacy company, what are they trying to do when they're in the stock market and they're trying to get these higher valuations?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla's value is totally out of control and completely irrational. But like,
you're gonna get
Tesla,
some hate mail from Tesla, bros.
I'm good with it. I'm good with it. Look, listen, anyone who believes this market is rational, you want to send me hate mail? Go ahead. It's totally irrational. It's due to the factors that we're living in right now, where people have no idea where to put their money, so they're putting it into the stock market. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe we'll catch up to those valuations if our economy starts to grow, but I do not see it. And I'm not saying Tesla's not a great company. I'm just saying it's overvalued. But so if Tesla was just making cars, going back to our discussion, if Tesla was just making cars, then it would be valued as an automaker. I think what investors see there is that it can make these batteries, which will power electric cars, making it a platform instead of just a maker of physical goods. There's also, like, going back to the whole software technology company thing, like, there's one more thing I should add, which is that there's something unbelievable about being able to make something once and sell it infinite amount of times. So you would also include, you mentioned Slack and it made me think of it. You could also include like Slack as an example of this, right? Slack doesn't make its money on services. It builds the product once and it can sell it to every company across the world, which is why Salesforce bought it for so much money.
Yeah, can you explain this in particular? Because this is a very good market phenomena that I think a lot of people don't really understand about tech companies, which is that they accumulate growth over time. And as you said, they can actually just build a product and then send it an infinite number of times, which, if you think about it from a business perspective, is like the greatest thing ever. I mean, GM has to build a physical car and then sell that car. They have to make like 50,000 cars to make 50,000 sales. Slack makes one product and they can make 50,000 sales, like make 100,000, 1,000,000 sales. And so what business lesson prospect can you realistically learn from software when you're trying to compare it to more physical work? Because one thing I really hate is watching people who are in that space be like, this is what we learned about American business. I'm like, you are not in the same realm as like mom and pop restaurant. Like, shut up.
No doubt. There's something about building something online that does allow you to sort of generate infinite product sales without any additional capital cost. Really, I mean, of course, you're paying for security and like the HR for the people in your business, but that's about it. And so that causes fundamental changes in the way that our economy works. An example I use in my book is TurboTax, right? Before TurboTax, you would have accountants go to families across the country and help them do their taxes. And there was a whole class of accountants that would make a good living doing this. And it took a lot of people. And then TurboTax is made, and now they have to make it once, and it can work for people across the economy, replacing the labor of the accountants. And all that money goes to Intuit. So, I don't know if there's like any I would rather focus on that than say, I'd rather focus on like, how do we deal with this issue that our society is encountering versus say, and that's why you should always build a TurboTax and not be an accountant. That would be a terrible decision.
The accounting version of learn to code.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
So speaking of the stock market, let's get into the actual news, which is that Airbnb had its massive IPO last week. So firstly, can you sort of explain what an IPO is? But secondly, how is it that Airbnb just had such a massive IPO? If we're looking at the pandemic defining everything, travel, staying places that aren't your own, it seems like that should be down, but it's really going up right now. So it seems like there's a deeper story going on there about this vision of the future people have.
Yeah. So an IPO is when a company will sell off a chunk of itself to public market investors. So you start, companies that are privately owned, the ownership is distributed among a limited set of investors. Or sometimes in a sole proprietorship, it's just the owner or some of their business partners. And then when a company gets to a big enough size, they can sell in the stock market. So, individual investors can purchase shares and then they can enjoy the fruits of that company's growth as it goes. And so right now we are seeing an incredible move of investor money into technology companies. And you guys had Scott Galloway on the post-corona episode. Yes. He's talking about like if you invested in these big 5 technology companies before the pandemic, you've made like 50% on your money, which is sort of like an unheard of return in such a short amount of time. But so the reason that this is happening, I think there's 2 reasons this is happening. I mean, Scott did such a good job that I don't think I'm going to come close to that. But I think that, look, people see that like I said at the top, that the economy is really moving in a direction of technology faster than we expected before. And they want to get involved in this growth. And they also see that they're starting to realize hey, Airbnb builds one system where people can, lease their houses and rent them and they can make unlimited amounts of money from that. That's pretty good, something I want to be invested in. And then there's also just the fact that interest rates are so low and people are trying to find ways to put their money and they're just dumping it into the stock market in just sort of completely irrational ways. And I think that you put those 2 forces together and you have the tech giants growing as they are and you have Airbnb exploding on the stock market as it comes out. And I guess one last thing I'll say about Airbnb is I don't think the company was impacted at the same level as you might have imagined as the pandemic hit, because the first moment the pandemic hit, everyone was like, oh crap, well, travel's gone. So, sell Airbnb. And that's why they had to sell at $30 a share in a debt financing round, because everyone felt they were about to die. But then this weird thing happened was where people were like, well, I don't want to sit in my home all day long. And can I find a place to go nearby that's safe?
Yes.
And Airbnb filled that gap beautifully. And I swear, I never would have imagined the amount of money that I spent on Airbnb, spending it in California this year, but it's been a lifesaver. So actually Airbnb hasn't been impacted by the pandemic in the way a lot of people would have expected. And I think that's probably, the reasons around the optimism for the stock.
It's a fascinating company to watch, I guess. And none of this is original, but at the same time, you're looking at a company like DoorDash just goes public. And to your point, Alex, one of the crazy kind of fiscal things we have going on in our economy right now is we actually have like a record high personal savings rate. Like more Americans have not had this much money in the bank in like years. Mm-hmm. And yet we have an intense, and I wouldn't say small because I don't want to minimize it, probably about 1/10 of our population, which is epically suffering. I mean, like truly like unemployment, eviction moratorium, back rent, needs forbearance. And I talk about that all the time, but it's leading to these like really strange phenomenon in our markets. A lot of our listeners, I mean, look, are probably predisposed to the view I am is like, none of this shit makes any sense. So like you look at the DoorDash IPO and you're like, this company's what is it, like $60 billion market cap? Like that's insane.
Sagar, what is DoorDash? Because actually a lot of people don't even use it.
By the way, I don't even know what the hell DoorDash is. I've never heard of DoorDash before until it IPO'd. I don't know anyone who uses DoorDash. Apparently a lot of people use it. So first explain that, what the hell it is. And second, just like that general observation. I mean, I'm hearing like $2,000 .com bubble stuff. In some commentary, is that apt? Is it accurate? I mean, how are you looking at different companies, different classes of stocks as we go forward?
Yeah, so DoorDash is a company that will bring you food that you order at a restaurant.
Got it. Okay.
Similar to Uber Eats and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It had a terrifically successful IPO because the market is drunk. It's drunk.
I'm noticing a theme here, Alex.
Yeah.
I swear. I mean, I didn't come here intending to insult every technology company that you guys bring up. Yeah. I actually, as a tech reporter, a lot of people say tech reporters hate tech companies. I think there's a lot of really cool things that these tech companies do. It's why I'm interested in reporting on them. I think their businesses are fascinating. I think the people that run them are fascinating. I think the way that they do business is fascinating. And I also think many of them are extremely overvalued. And DoorDash would definitely be, at the top of the list. And I think, I mean, the day that DoorDash IPO, just looking at the multiple that they got, I don't remember the exact number, but I tweeted that it would be a great time to short DoorDash if the market wasn't drunk. And I really believe that. And I mean, this is, by the way, now I'm about to discredit all the financial advice that I've given up until this point, but I think it'll be indicative in terms of the way that I see things right now, where I don't have a lot of money to invest as a journalist, you guys would imagine, but I'm still trying to be smart about what I do. And I had everything in total market index funds before this pandemic, and I took it out.
Wow.
And so I'm in long-term, low rate savings right now. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see how this is sustainable, and I'm not going to bet what I have on it. So I could be wrong, and I could miss out on some serious upside over time. There's this theory that the market always goes up, but it just seems absurd right now. And I can't explain what's going on outside of saying that the fundamentals are completely off, and I'm scared by it.
So this is where we acknowledge that we've been unfairly teeing you up to just be negative. Yes. Let's talk about the positive. What are...
I got nothing to say.
You have nothing. There's no tech leaders, there are no tech companies, there are no trends. Bitcoin reference. There's got to be something here.
Yeah, Bitcoin's going to 30,000. Mark it down.
There we go.
I'm kidding.
There we go. Yeah,
I don't have any Bitcoin either. But look, I mean, what I wrote in the book was a analysis of what they do internally, and that's something I believe in. Of course, the tech company cultures have their own problems, and I'm not saying anything is perfect, but the key to always day one was saying that these companies have been inventive, and they've done these really interesting things with technology inside their workplaces that have allowed them to continually reinvent versus spend time on their flagship products. And I think it's something the rest of the economy might want to consider mirroring. I got a good story for you guys if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please.
Hey, go for it.
So in the book, I sort of delineate work into two categories. Idea work, anything involved in coming up with a new idea.
Wait, Alex, quick pause.
Yeah.
I'm just laughing. What if we been no, I don't want to hear it. We're just no, actually, we're just good.
I respect you guys, so I wouldn't tell it. I wouldn't tell it. You guys know what you're doing. Sorry,
continue.
Go ahead.
But
man, sorry.
So I would say the tech giants, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity. The tech giants split up work into two categories. So they view it as you're either doing idea work, anything that's involved in coming up with a new idea, or execution work, anything involved in supporting a pre-existing product or your flagship product. I probably should have called it support work, but don't want to get into the revisionist history as to why I chose execution. But okay, so most companies spend almost all their time on execution work. They build this flagship product, and even if they want to reinvent themselves, they just don't ever have the time to do it because it just takes so much time to support their existing business that the idea of creating something new is absurd to them. And what the tech giants have done really well is they've used technology to minimize execution work and make room for idea work. And here's the story. So Amazon had Amazon's major labor cost was coming from vendor managers inside its company that were basically the people responsible to stock their warehouses with products. So a vendor manager would be on the phone with Tide saying, I need this many units of detergent in these fulfillment centers at this time for this price. And it would be this negotiation. You'd feel be a relationship business. And then Amazon basically said at some point in the middle of last decade, we have 20 years of historical retail data. And, these humans make mistakes all the time. What we could probably do is use that data to allow machine learning to make these decisions and then free up the humans to do something else. And so it took a couple of years, but now inside Amazon's retail organization, people do not do these tasks anymore. It's largely done by machine learning algorithms, which decide what they want. So Amazon has a pretty good idea of like which zip codes are going to buy North Faces before the winter hits, and they'll stock their fulfillment centers with those beforehand. So that's how you're able to get your product for, in a day. It's not only because they're quick with the trucks, it's because they know what you're going to buy before you're going to buy it. And so they use these algorithms to basically set almost all this stuff on autopilot, and they freed up their workers to do other things. And so one of the most interesting stories I came across while writing the book was there's a guy, Dilip Kumar, who was working in pricing and promotions inside Amazon. And, he goes to work underneath Jeff Bezos as his technical advisor. So someone who would shadow him and take all the meetings that Bezos takes. And by the time he's done, pricing and promotions is on its way to be automated. And so he says, all right, time to do something new. So he gets together with a bunch of other people from the retail organization, and they say, what is the most annoying part of shopping in real life, and how can we solve that with technology? And they initially come up with this idea for a big vending machine. You like punch in your items in a bunch of tubes, and I would do all these things and push it out to you. And then they're like, all right, this isn't going to work. And then they end up developing Amazon Go, which is the store where you just scan in, take everything you want off the shelves, and sensors and machine learning tools are out there figuring out what you've taken. You can walk out, no scanning, and then it will charge you for what you've taken. And this is going to be the future of Amazon's retail organization. So I just think that this is the way that companies are going to work in the future. They're going to find ways to change the nature of work inside their companies, and use that added room in the workplace to create new things. And I think the tech giants have done this well, and the book is filled with stories of companies that have done stuff along a similar trajectory, and that's why they're doing so well.
What's so fascinating listening to you, Alex, is like one half of my brain is like, wow, that's amazing. Human ingenuity, technology. The other half is like, yeah, but what about all those people? And that's where I think it starts to intersect with politics, to your point about Intuit, TurboTax. And by the way, I use TurboTax. It's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
But like,
Me too.
yeah. And like, but all that money now I know is kicking up to this like basically like financial services conglomerate, and they own like basically if you want to run a business and use any sort of accounting software, you have to use them, and they have a virtual monopoly on this. It's actually one of the more monopolistic areas we don't really talk about that much. But what I'm fascinated by, and I'd love to talk more about this, is how these companies are starting to butt up against politics. So Marshall and I, when we were in Silicon Valley back when you were allowed to travel, and we're having dinner with some pretty prominent people. And one of them said something I thought has stuck with me ever since. He's like, you could build a unicorn company, a $1 billion corporation, tech company in Silicon Valley before 2014, 2015. You never had to once think about the US government. And it seems to be now that is just not the case. Like, no matter what you are doing, you have to think, what's Washington going to think? That has fundamentally kind of altered the power structure. And of course, I think Uber is kind of like your quintessential example. I mean, to its critics, Uber's main financial innovation was like unbundling the benefits that you get at work and then like putting you in a car and then pairing it up with a really cool, I don't want to diminish what they did, a very cool like algorithm which places you with a car which is near you and all sorts of other interesting stuff. But like at the end of the day, a lot of these drivers are barely making like minimum wage. And now with the failure of whatever that law was in California, Prop 22 in California, that's just not going to change. And so as we see tech butt up against politics, I think labor is going to be one of the most contentious issues. How do they think about that, Alex? Because they talk a huge game about being pro-worker, And in my mind, they usually mean pro white collar worker, as in like their own tech workforce, but not necessarily the non white collar staff. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is one of the major issues we're going to confront over the next 100 years. This is a major, major, major deal. And I think that, like, in the book, that one part is saying this is where we're going, but I definitely hit the second half of that question, which is what does it mean for the rest of us? And I mean, all tech is politics right now, no doubt about it. Not only in terms of the way that they interact with the political system, in terms of antitrust and laws like Prop 22, but also in terms of the decisions they make with their products. Think about Facebook. Facebook used to say, we don't want to be the arbiter of truth. Think about Twitter. They used to say, we're the free speech wing of the free speech party. And now they're labeling Trump tweets and taking down things that go against WHO consensus on the coronavirus. Right. So tech is deeply integrated with the political system. And I think where we're going to net out on this is that some tech companies are going to pick political sides in a way we haven't seen before. You might have seen that a little bit with the Coinbase thing. Being apolitical has a way of being political. And in terms of the worker, it's going to be a major economic problem. And so it's not all, like, we don't really have any data right now that shows that automation today is leading to mass unemployment. Certainly it didn't happen in the Amazon case. A lot of these people went to more inventive jobs. But there are going to be places where people get hurt. And so I think I'm not an education policy expert, but I went back in the last chapter to Cornell, where I studied labor relations. So I'm coming at it from that standpoint. And I went and I asked, all the old professors that I had spoken with back there and some of the newer staff, what's going to happen here? And so they said, first, we need a new way to lead companies. That's the business part of it. From a policy standpoint, the thing that I was surprised about is they harped on education, and maybe I should have been prepared for that since they are professors. But they're on the front lines there, seeing students come in, being prepared to memorize and spit back, and they have no tolerance of failure. So, like, when we all know this is like a kind of prominent factor in American society right now. But when a kid gets an A-, the parents call the teacher and yell. Yeah. And it doesn't prepare a kid to be an abstract thinker or to do anything but the way the things that society prescribes to you. And that's a major issue. So I think that the way that we're going to really get out of this is going to be a rethinking of the education system in a way that promotes abstract thinking, in a way that, and I don't know how exactly we get there, but a way that encourages students and their families to understand that taking the path off the most traveled road is the only way to success right now. I mean, you have to be able to think outside of sort of the conveyor belt, so to speak, in order to be able to really be successful today, especially as we're, in a society of really where like the spoils go to a small segment of winners and everybody else seems to get screwed. We need to find ways to empower more people to take chances and take part in and have more people share in the spoils versus what we have today.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is the magic word antitrust, which gets us into the conversation about Facebook, the FTC, Instagram. But first, I want to reference something you wrote in your newsletter after the election that was really helpful. And it was in response to the Prop 22 decision, not decision, but the Prop 22 vote, which is that, can the government effectively regulate tech companies whose products people generally like? So if we're going back to the progressive era, I don't think there was anyone who was standing for, big oil. Like, no one was like, no, that's my favorite local industrial.
I love the railroads, Marshall.
Andrew Carnegie's way better than JB Morgan, right? There weren't the like Elon Musk equivalent in the robber and baron era. And if we're thinking of in the year 2000, end of the 1990s, no one liked Microsoft, right? That was actually part of the issue. No one would naturally be using Internet Explorer, but what was at hand was this idea that Microsoft was making it so that you had to use their product blah, 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 was sort of resolved by the courts, was sort of not resolved by the courts, and by just the industry moving forward. But today, as we're talking about everything from Facebook, Instagram, Uber, Lyft, those were your examples, how does regulation work in those areas where people are generally favorable to the products people make?
Yeah, it's one of the questions I've been thinking about since this discussion started. Like, do people want their elected representatives putting restrictions on Amazon so, potentially competitors have a better shot at beating Amazon, but now your package gets there in 4 days instead of one? Are you happy with the person that voted for these rules? So I think it's going to be...
Quick question.
Yeah.
This is me just pushing back on my own premise. Is that really what the antitrust issue would be? But do you think it's true that antitrust regulation of Amazon could result in that drastic a difference in service that someone would notice? So for example, I now notice that if I order at 10:52, I did this 2 days ago, at night, I will literally get my package of pens the next morning, 8 a.m. Is that something that antitrust could potentially do away with?
It's a good question. I think I think we can take a look at the Google example. Google, they're going for defaults, right? So I look. Let me back up for a second. The antitrust action on these platforms will inevitably trickle down to their products. So the Department of Justice is going after defaults for Google. So Google pays Apple something like 14 to 18 billion a year to show up as the default search engine on iOS. So let's say the Department of Justice wins that case, and that's no longer allowed to happen. So what will likely result is there'll be a screen where you're going to have to pick the search engine you want to use. But let's say they say Google can't be that default anymore because they already have Android and Chrome and all these other defaults. So maybe you now have to use DuckDuckGo or Bing, or you have to use, or shout out to Bing, or you have to use, or potentially Apple starts to develop its own search engine, which we know will be worse than Google's because they're not good at doing these things. And now you have to use that. Let's talk about Facebook, right? So, let's say they break up Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook, and let's say you're an advertiser there, right? So you now, instead of like using one ad system and placing ads on Facebook and Instagram and optimizing that way, you can only place ads on one. It's sort of a remedy that they might seek. And that might lead to a worse experience there for the person. So
it's possible, right? But the counter to that is that, okay, well, you make Facebook spin off of Instagram, and then by Mark Zuckerberg's own admission, Instagram is actually taking users from Facebook. By the way, I'm one of them. I don't use Facebook. I use Instagram a lot. And except I know that Mark still owns me. Well, if Instagram is sold off, then Mark has to compete for my business across his platform versus Instagram. I mean, that's kind of the classic antitrust argument. And this is a really fascinating thing too, which is that when we're talking here about Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, there's like 3 tiers of concern, right? One is that they're integrating all 3 like into a single user funnel so that they can build a holistic advertising profile on you. 2 is kind of that they can serve ads across like Facebook and Instagram and optimize it that way. And then 3 is like the basic anti-competition stuff that I laid out there. I don't know. I'm curious for your thoughts there, which is that because you say it's going to trickle down to the product. I mean, I think that is true, but it could be a good thing. Like maybe Facebook and Instagram will be better. One of the things I was fascinated by reading Sarah Frier's Fryer, her book No Filter, is that the original people who designed Instagram were not all in on like this engagement strategy. They wanted their ads to be a very specific, like much more aesthetically pleasing way. And I'm reading and I'm like, thank God, like Facebook could have ruined Instagram. And like if they had, because they pushed back and they were like, no, we have our own like distinct identity. They were like, we're going to make less money, but this is a very different place. So I could actually see it. It could be a positive thing. I don't know. Yeah,
look, I'm not necessarily like the. Yeah, I mean, they would definitely argue there's going to be a product degradation. I know there'll be changes. And could they be worse? I mean, when the government's making these decisions, I think there's a good chance. I don't know exactly what they're going to look like. But it's interesting. Your question's interesting because it assumes that Facebook does have a monopoly in social networking.
Yeah.
and that its only competitor is Instagram. And I think there's a good argument to be made that that's not the case. That Facebook has real competition from people like Snapchat and especially TikTok. And that more than anything else will motivate it to make its set of products as best as, the best that they can be, versus, a crappier version of both, just so that they have this, they can solve some internal war.
Can you correct me if I'm wrong, though? As I understand it from the FTC's perspective, TikTok and Snapchat aren't social networks the way that Facebook is a social network. So I agree. And we're just talking about, does Facebook have competition? I definitely think there's a attention competition thing. So for example, once again, I spend way more time on Instagram than I spend on the native Facebook app. People definitely spend more time on TikTok than they spend on Instagram. That's why the Instagram has rolled out the terrible Reels product. We've been shilling things. It's key to say when something's bad, Reels is terrible. So how do we think of that competition within something as amorphous as a social network?
Yeah, I mean, I view social networks, maybe unlike some others, as zero-sum games for people's time. So I think
that's how they view
like
it too, to be clear, right? Like they view it the same way, right? Yeah.
I think there's real truth to that. I mean, honestly, I use TikTok. I'll use Instagram. A minute I spend on TikTok is a minute I won't spend on Instagram, and this is sort of what I talk about reinvention in the book. This is why the company has to reinvent, is because social media users especially are the most fickle of any users. As soon as you make like a product change that people don't like, they're gone. In fact, Facebook is bleeding teenage users in the US right now. So yeah, I do think it's zero sum. Ultimately, yeah, okay, does Facebook have a network? So does it have a directory? Yes. Does TikTok have a directory? No. Do something on Instagram and Reels compete directly with each other? Yes, they do. So I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that if they, and I'm not trying to make their defense for them. I'm just trying to think this through with you guys. But it does seem to me that if they made their products suck, then people would stop using them. And another great example of this is them cribbing Snapchat stories off of Snapchat. If Snapchat isn't a social network, then why was Facebook thinking it was like an existential crisis? And that was because actually original sharing on Facebook was going down. People were sharing less on Facebook. The product was getting worse. People were spending more time on Snapchat, and they had to make drastic changes. And some might say unethical changes, by copying stories and thinking about not only did Facebook copy stories after the Snapchat experience, but they actually reoriented their entire product from a broadcast product to one that started to emphasize intimate messaging. That's why you saw them say, they said this thing that they were pivoting to privacy. That was bullshit. They were never pivoting to privacy. They were pivoting to private messaging because they saw people didn't want to post something that goes to everyone. They would much rather share with a group of people on Messenger or a smaller group on the newsfeed. So this is social networking. I'll say social networking especially is a vicious space to compete. And Facebook doesn't have an operating system. Think about the other four big tech companies. Google has an operating system, Android. Apple has a couple of them. Microsoft has Windows. Amazon, they have, I don't want to say the A word, but they have that voice computing system that a lot of people are using inside the Echo. I would set it off if I said it. So, and what does Facebook have? You can only use Facebook by opening up an Apple device or a Google device, no Facebook device. So it's kind of a precarious position for them to be in.
I remember for a while they were thinking about a Facebook phone, and I was like, "What a fucking disaster!"
They made it. It was a disaster. And by the way, that's
it came out. I didn't know it was real.
You missed 2014, dude.
It was retrofitted Android. And that's why they're doing Oculus, by the way. It's so they think that this might be a place they could finally have an operating system. And actually, as I'm speaking with Mark Zuckerberg, he pulls out his Android phone, and he was talking about how the way that you operate a phone is exactly the opposite of the way that he would want to operate a phone. Where he says in real life, you pick a person to hang out with, and then you decide what to do. On a phone, you pick what to do, and then you decide who you want to contact or who you want to do it with. And he wants to create an operating system where that's the opposite. Is that going to work? I don't know. I want to say that I'm building up to say this, which is that given the antitrust situation that we have going on with Facebook, especially, and potentially Google also, I think it's going to be time, not the government, that's going to end up ending these monopolies. This space is is too competitive, and we have a couple of years down the road where these cases are going to hit, and then we have a couple of years where they figure out the remedies at trial. So I think by the time we hit them, I mean, look what happened to Microsoft. They would have just given it a couple of years, and the company would have been upended by the mobile transformation. And I think the same thing's going to happen to these guys.
Here's a question about that too, because so obviously the Microsoft case basically doesn't end up getting resolved. They move forward, but an argument that antitrust advocates make is that even the legal proceedings themselves, however, hobbled, Death Star, Titanic, Microsoft to the point that alternatives, actually, Sagar, someone who we just had on was talking about this. I can't remember who. But someone has said, hey, like they would have loved to purchase Google. They would have loved to do X, Y, and Z thing of Yahoo. But because there was all of the antitrust scrutiny on them, they sort of did and I'm an Xbox user, so I'm not trying to be mean here, but Xbox, the first series was sort of like also ran compared to the PlayStation 2. And the Zune was an obvious disaster when it came to the iPod. We're really doing the throwbacks here. So what do you think about the argument that even if we don't wake up in 2027 with a broken up Facebook, the oxygen that is going to be given to the space is going to be such that 1,000 flowers will bloom?
Let me add an addendum to that, which is that does Mark Zuckerberg buy the next Instagram today? I just don't think so, right?
He can't.
And so because of
no
this.
way. Yeah. He can't do that.
Right.
So, I think that, by the way, Marshall, I'm glad that you're joining me in this moment where we start to knock all the different tech companies. And Sagar, if you have any that you don't like, I often welcome you.
I'm too busy shilling for endorsements.
Someone has to pay the bills.
I kind of see how this works.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do think that they would have been that time would have been unkind to these companies anyway, and I think the antitrust stuff is going to potentially hasten that. But there's one little wrinkle here which I think is worth considering, which is, does this antitrust action make room for smaller competitors, or does it create wins for the other tech giants? And I think there's a strong case to be made that it will create wins for the other tech giants. Take the Google example. For instance, we talked about them being the default search on Apple and that being a main thing the DOJ is going after. So let's say they prohibit that and Apple creates its own search. You've just given the most rich company in the world an opportunity to get into the extremely lucrative area of search engine, of being a search engine, and that being on their devices. So they'd have to sort of tell Google not to do it and also tell Apple not to do it in order to be able to create real change. When we're talking about antitrust, they might end up, creating monopolies. And I know that, on this show, you guys like to talk about governance and sort of the impact of our policies. And, that's something that really needs to be thought through is the result of this going to end up being, a couple of even more powerful companies than the one we have now?
It's an interesting point. Had never even thought about it. I already know our most extreme friends would say, they'd be like, well, break them all up. What do you mean? And I'm like, well, it's complicated. Like Google and Facebook, like you said, it's going to take like a decade in court to even figure this shit out. By that time, maybe Facebook is even dead. One interesting thing I want to get with you, because we're talking about TikTok and we're talking about Facebook. Yeah. There's been a lot of talk here in Washington. Zuckerberg, I can't remember when his speech was. I think it was right before the pandemic. He basically came to DC and he was
the Georgetown one.
The Georgetown speech. So he was like, I am like the US answer to Facebook. He's basically trying to cast himself in like nationalist language. And look, like, I think that's great. I don't think it's sincere really in any way, and that's fine. Like people are adopting ideas that I want them to. And whether it's insincere or not, if that helps them, I think that's not a bad thing. But I've noticed a lot of derision against him within Silicon Valley, kind of for adopting this kind of like nationalist rhetoric versus TikTok. I don't think it's any secret that they would like to see TikTok banned from a competition standpoint. But like, look, I would like to see it banned too from a national security standpoint. What are your thoughts there? Like, do you ever think we're going to have another like widespread use app that is like literally made and run in China like TikTok? I feel like it might be the very last one. Marshall, you have something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just one quick thing, quick little misstatement. The point of his speech was that U.S. tech giants themselves are the bulwark against Chinese tech companies. So you're saying, so what his argument was is if you're concerned about Alibaba, if you're concerned about all of this, the CCP, work with me, don't break me up. The Chinese don't break up their power. So that's just a quick thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we're talking about China because that I think is like a pretty good next thing to discuss in terms of like what the impact of this antitrust could be. If you weaken the U.S. companies, do you make room for another Chinese company to come in? And I also think it's possible. The Zuckerberg speech was interesting because he did sort of, make this delineation between American tech companies and Chinese tech companies. And we were already living in a world where we sort of had a bifurcated internet where like American companies were banned in China. And we had taken some action against a Chinese company. But I think that the past couple of years have definitely added some gasoline on that. And it does seem like there's really two visions of the internet emerging. And we could end up in a place where like some countries decide they want the Chinese social media and some countries decide they want American social media. And then just to go to your last point, the question about, can we see another company like TikTok start to get popular in the US? I mean, I think you have to say absolutely. There was a moment not long ago where we didn't think there was going to be another, challenger to Facebook in the social media world. And TikTok has absolutely blown up. I mean, it's amazing. That app, once you start using it, is almost impossible to put down.
I've heard that. I don't use it. But
Neither of us use I used it in the browser of my phone once.
People send me
downloaded it.
TikToks mostly to troll me.
And I get the concern. And of course, like, given my job, it's like something I need to do. And I've actually really only picked up on it recently. And just watching that algorithm work is pretty unbelievable. And we know that China has some serious AI research. We know they have a work culture that enables them to put stuff out faster than we do here in the US. Not saying it's something that we want to praise. It seems like a pretty devastating work culture to be a part of, where they just only work. There's no work-life balance. There's work.
Yeah. There's actually a new chart out. I was just seeing this on Twitter, which is like the amount of time people spend working in China is like by a mile of every other country.
It's absurd. And the question is, are you going to work better? I would say it's not necessarily the case. You're just, showing up. We know that toxic work cultures is just people showing up at the office because they have to, versus actually doing something. But yeah, I would not rule out the possibility of more consumer apps from China coming into the US and getting real traction.
Wow.
I'm genuinely pretty skeptical about that, just because it seems as if TikTok came in at the perfect moment where attention wasn't focused on it. But if we're sort of talking about a theme here, like first part of the show's theme is about the market, frothiness, all those sort of things. But we're also looking at defining team is going to be like a brewing, and maybe it's not even a Cold War, but it's a brewing conflict between the US and China. It's just simply not going to be as easy to look and see TikTok as harmless, or see the sort of future there as harmless. But I want to get to our last section. Speaking of your actual job and everything, you were at BuzzFeed, you now are on Substack, and you have a podcast. So you're hitting the sort of new media space that we're into. What are your thoughts generally on the future of independent media, and whether or not are you going to end up back at a major media company in 5 to 6 years because everyone gets tired of subscribing to too many Substacks?
Look, I think the future of independent media is bright. It's the reason why I decided to start my own Substack called Big Technology. I did it because my book came out in April, and I saw a lot of opportunity. I was already writing a newsletter at BuzzFeed called the Tech Giant Update, and I was able to bring my subscribers over, and I saw a lot of opportunity to do what I kind of viewed as newsletter plus. Like I wanted to do a newsletter and other stuff, freelance for some places. I dreamed like a stretch goal for me was eventually becoming a contributor at CNBC, and that happened like a month after.
Congrats.
Thank you. So that was super exciting for me. And I said, once I start the newsletter, I don't necessarily need to make money from paid subscribers. I could, syndicate it, and I'm syndicating it for a fee on Medium's 10, who's been an amazing partner for me. And then, I'm not, I didn't grow up. I started my career buying advertising and selling ad tech before I moved into journalism. And I'm not opposed to advertising. And I think this week looks like I'm about to close the first ad deal for the newsletter.
I have
So-
to ask
That's
about that
interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
because Substack, this is getting like nitty gritty media
Yeah.
nerd stuff, but Substack
Yeah.
is not friendly at a company level to advertising. I think that advertising, the literal rhetoric they use is advertising makes these products worse. It incentivizes clickbait. What do you think about that
Well,
debate as you try to use it? Yeah.
You would understand why they would say that because they make their money only on subscriptions.
On
But I,
subs,
on the
yeah.
other hand, am trying to support an independent media business, and I think that's ridiculous. And if you look through the history of media companies, they've embraced advertising. So why shouldn't I? And so I'm doing it. And I think the people at Substack are great, and they've built a good platform. But ultimately, if they decide to kick me off because I'm going to run ads, that's their decision. I can end up like the newsletter isn't theirs. I mean, the subscriber list
Right.
isn't
You
theirs.
have
The
your
subscriber
subs,
list
right.
is mine. The post. One of the cool things about doing this is for the first time in my life, the posts are mine. It doesn't. The stuff that I write doesn't belong to another media company, which is cool. So I can bring those over eventually. But
I'm
yeah, at the end
loving
of the day.
this.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, this is really interesting. And look, I know this can be wonky to a lot of people, but the dynamics through which independent media works, how it funds itself, how it's going to evolve, really is going to affect, in my opinion, how all of us are getting our content. So listen to this, because what I'm taking away from this is that people have gone all in on subscription, and people have predicted like subscription fatigue for a long time. But let's be honest, it's just not true. I can't remember where I'm getting this from, so whoever I'm plagiarizing, sorry. The reason that it probably has not arrived is that because there's enough people who are leaving legacy products and joining subscription rather than people who already subscribe to stuff topping out. As in, there's still a pretty big market. But I still think that edge is coming. So your decision to not run subscription and to get advertising, I wouldn't say it's like revanchist, like you're going back to anything, but you're trying to pioneer a new model. When you talk to other people in your space, because there's a lot of tech reporters, and I think that probably is the one that makes the most amount of sense. You guys are delivering like content to like a high value audience. People are willing to pay a lot for business news, like that type of thing. Kind of the traditional trade publication, how it's always made money. Not that that's what you do, but just that's kind of a framework through which people might be able to understand it. What are some other ways that you're trying to diversify in the future that other people might be able to follow? Because I want this space to blow up. I think being just based on subs is completely wrong. That there's got to be like 12 different ways in order to make this work.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think I definitely am showing a different way to do it. So here's what I think the revenue mix looks like for me down the road. So, and I feel like almost all this stuff is going. So advertising is a chunk. Then in terms of subscription, I will turn on like a membership model where for let's say $5 a month, folks can join in on live recordings of the Big Technology podcast and ask questions. Then syndication. I feel like syndication revenue is something that will be there. And I hope it continues with 1-0. It's been, like I said, just a fantastic partnership, and I love the people there. Podcast. I'm starting to run the podcast. It's not as big as your guys, but it's
Your Substack is bigger than our Substack, though, so
true.
we
Right.
all have avenues.
gotta-
well,
we gotta
welcome. By the
swap.
way,
We gotta
official
swap.
welcome to the Substack game, because you guys just launched, and I want to say it's
That's
great to
right.
have you on the platform. But yeah, podcast revenue can eventually, and the ad deal that I'm running is going to be across the newsletter and the podcast. So
Oh, that's awesome.
it'll be 1 unit on the newsletter, 1 unit on the podcast. And it will go to exclusive, like one headline sponsor. And then, for me, like, am I going to freelance here and there? Definitely. Like, I'm working on a freelance story now. And then, of course, like, working with CNBC is another part of it that I've just been lucky and feel grateful to be a part of. So it seems like it's a pretty diversified pool where if like one part of it goes away for a month or two, or, even permanently, the thing can continue.
Yeah.
And so it's been super fun actually trying to figure out, of course, as a reporter working working for media companies for like maybe 8 years before doing this. It's been interesting to go out and start my own business and see how it can work. And I think that there could be some real staying power. Now, I think, Marshall, you asked like whether or not I'm going to end up at another media company in 5 to 6 years. It could happen. I kind of think that you have to go about this stuff with an open mind. This is definitely an experiment for me. I didn't, leave BuzzFeed with a fiery screw BuzzFeed manifesto. I had a great time there. I just kind of wanted to do this thing on my own for a while. And I believe in what the press is doing. And if at a certain point I think I can, I can learn from people inside a publication and feel like it would be a better opportunity for me, then I definitely consider it. But right now, I love the Substack thing. It's been a true blast. I feel like I'm able to put the right amount of attention to the stories that I'm working on. I get to assign myself the stories that I want to work on, which is great. And I think it has some real staying power.
Yeah, I appreciate how non-ideological you are about all those frameworks, because a lot of people, they're either, like I said, advertising is bad because advertising means clicks. Some people have hangovers from writing, 30 pieces in one day at Business Insider back in 2015, and I totally get that. But I like how you're just approaching this from a very pragmatic perspective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the key is just to sustain it. And it's going to be one story a week, one way or the other, whether there's an advertiser or not, but it's a locked in audience and a good open rate. So I think it's worth trying.
Yeah. Well, look, man, all the best, and let people know where they can subscribe, check you out, all of that.
Yeah. So my podcast, if you like podcasts, it's Big Technology Podcast. Do a conversation with a tech insider or outside agitator once a week. Newsletter is called Big Technology on Substack. The book is Always Day One, available at all major booksellers.
All right, we'll put all that in the show notes. Alex, really appreciate you joining us, man. Thank you very much.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. And as a listener, this has really been a thrill for me. So hopefully we can do it again. I'm trying to get to the Stoller number, right? I think he's at 3 shows now. So I got my fingers crossed.
Friend of the pod.
Definitely.
Friend of the pod. All right.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, guys.